Welcome to Nashville. This is the epicenter of HPA service delivery, where we deliver RPA-as-a-Service. We'll jump right in. We're in unprecedented times right now, so we're doing this virtual tour to give you a sense of how we operate. You'll notice that some desks are bare of computer monitors and other peripherals that have since been taken home by associates. So in the very front area, we have our kind of collaboration space where we do our scrum of scrums, which you'll learn about throughout the day during this tour. We have a touch screen where we can run through and see for every different type of delivery team, what are all of the active implementations and what are the corresponding dates for those project plans. And so every day we have a scrum of scrums in here with the delivery leaders to go through it. It's a comfortable area where employees can relax, lots of natural sunlight, and lots of freedom. Follow me this way. Up here we've got our 3 of our 5 Nashville Technology Council awards. Here we've got Team of the Year, Innovator of the Year, and Infrastructure Engineer of the Year awards. We have several other awards that are not on the wall. This is our unsecured executive conference room. So we do have access control, and this is through one facial recognition gate at the front entrance, and then one key card gate. But the reason why we call this unsecured is because we'll allow anyone to come into this area if they have an appointment or otherwise not vetted to come into our space. And for the sake of this tour, I've propped open the second gate. We've got another facial recognition gate here, and this is our secured area from this point forward. We have a number of robot-named rooms all around the office, and we've got a slew of small breakout rooms, call rooms, collaboration spaces, which in an open floor plan is really important for our business analysts and developers to be able to jump on calls with clients and not be distracted. This is one of our project collaboration rooms. Lots of whiteboard space, technology, no distractions. Another room here, another collaboration space. We have a number of these throughout the office. As we move forward through this area, this is where all of our business analysts sit along this area of the office. Our delivery leader's office, my office, there's only 3 of them in the whole building. And then here we have our markets team sits, which is our marketing department, sales folks, sales engineers. Fully capable print, scan office area. Secured lockers. Everyone can set their own individual codes. Behind this door, you'll see later in the tour in Omnibot, this is a secured area with access control. And this is an additional layer of security for all of our production support. So you'll see folks with big banks of 6 monitors. Those are our production support experts. And that area is closed off to all other associates because you're connecting to live client environments via a secure tunnel. The third and final office. That's Aaron's office, who you'll meet if you haven't already. Then here we have our rear executive conference room. So this is generally where we have our leadership huddles and other large meetings. We've got a telepresence system in 3 of the rooms, which is really, really important, especially with so many people working from home. The ability to be able to have meetings and see each other's faces is really, really valuable. got a nice view, a little deck for folks to go out and relax. It's a really nice place to sit and eat lunch here in our kitchen. Modern commercial coffee makers, sparkling water, all that kind of stuff. We've got a really big supply closet here, which may or may not have kegs. And as we continue around, here we have our morning launch area. So we actually cram, 40, 50 people each morning into this little space huddled around this screen when they're actually here, and if not, we do it virtually as well. And you'll learn more about what we do during our daily launch later in the tour. This is, characteristic of our culture, and it's such a small thing, but this is our logo. It's a robot, and whenever we have a new workflow go into production, whenever we sign a new client, whenever we do anything that deserves celebrating, like the recent engagement of one of our associates, we come out here and we celebrate. Requisite ping pong tables because technology company. Got some bikes that people can ride out on that we supply. It's not Silicon Valley, but we're a pretty frugal bunch. But there's little odds and ends like that go a long way and don't cost a lot of money. So we try to be very selective about those types of investments. Moving on, this is the other side of the office, and this is where most of the developers sit. So what you're not seeing right now, because we are in kind of pandemic mode, is on these screens on each side of this area and throughout the office, there are always delivery metrics posted. What is the target number of workflows that we're working to get into production in any given month by team, because we have our teams segmented in different pods, and where are we at against that target, and where are we projected to end the month. Long ago, we used to have a big revenue number. The problem is that delivery only has so much influence over revenue. Fundamentally, they're there to be a factory and to produce widgets. Our widgets are workflows. And so we want to give them the information to see how productive are they being at producing those widgets, those workflows. And each one of those workflows is a conduit to create value for our clients, which is recognized by us as revenue, which is really great in an outcome-based construct. So we have an additional layer of security here. This is an IT office and an IT storage cabinet, and then here we have a conditioned, fully secured server room. This also has facial recognition. There are only 3 people in the organization that are authorized to be in the space. I am the venture leader, and I am not one of those people. And then moving on, we'll kind of connect back to the other side of the building. We've got another collaboration space, call room. And then here we have our final telepresence suite. So we have several large, differently sized telepresence suites, which really helps, especially with so many WebEx-based conference calls that we have with clients to take requirements and build out new workflows. So we look forward to spending the rest of the day with you and teaching you a little bit more about what we do and how we do it. And like I said, welcome to Nashville. Good morning and welcome to Nashville. I'm Avery Fisher, the venture leader for HPA, and I'm joined today by my colleagues.
John Agnich, I'm the global delivery leader for HPA.
Aaron Mead, I'm the markets leader for HPA.
And today, we're going to do a virtual quarantine tour of our facility in Nashville, Tennessee. We'll start with an overview of the service, HPA Robots as a Service, and the characteristics that will help inform the
floor walk that we'll do throughout the day today. Then we'll move into that delivery tour. We'll go through our daily launch where we do a production all hands, a scrum of scrums. Then we'll go through and review how we gather requirements with our business analysis function, followed by an implementation tour of how we do development and robot testing. And then finally, we'll go through production support and show you how we run the robotic workforce, which is the culmination of all of the work that you'll see prior to visiting production support. Finally, we'll conclude with a discussion on our product capabilities and walk you through the product architecture. The level set to make sure that everyone's on the same page. RPA, or Robotic Process Automation, is software that mimics the way a human uses a computer to complete manual rules-based work. So the same way that a human being can move a mouse, click on buttons, move from one application to another application, we build software-based robots that emulate the way that a human being does that to complete those same manual rules-based tasks, but with much greater accuracy, precision, scalability, and dramatic quality improvement from error reduction. When we look at the RPA market broadly, the factors that are driving RPA adoption are centered around, for most executives in the C-suites of Global 2000 companies, focused around driving down operating costs. It is the number one most important thing for the C-suite. What we'll explore as we go through the discussion today is the considerable factors that obfuscate or complicate actually realizing a reduction in operating costs with RPA initiatives. Following operation cost reduction, organizations, especially in a post-pandemic world, are seeking ways to reduce reliance on human labor. And that means shifting work that can be done by software to software to overcome the challenges of shifting to work from home, to overcome the challenges of not utilizing staff with their highest and best use in mind. And there are a variety of other attributes that drive RPA adoption, and we'll review that throughout the course of today's visit. When we look at that same suite of Global 2000 organizations, and we look at where they're at on the adoption curve for robotic process automation, it's truly stunning that fewer than 5% of organizations have a scaled, mature RPA center of excellence delivering well-defined return on investment. While there's been an immense amount of investment in this space in the last 2 years, it's still a greenfield. And there's still a lot of very expensive lessons being learned through overconsumption and overinvestment of licenses without a well-defined methodology for defining and achieving return on investment. And many of the reasons that go into that you'll see on your screen, but the pace of change of operational processes is one of the hallmark challenges of achieving ROI with RPA. So as organizations are looking to automate these operational processes, they are, by definition, operational processes that are messy, they're dirty, they're subject to change, and that is anathema to how IT projects work, right? Where you have a clear set of requirements, a clearly defined goal, you work towards that, you implement it, and then it's off and running. With RPA, it's a different paradigm where you should expect it to break constantly. And that pace of change and the considerable maintenance implications that come with that hold back a lot of RPA initiatives. Additionally, finding, attracting, and retaining skilled people with this very in-demand skill set is an immense challenge that can't be understated. along with other challenges like effective governance, streamlined data intake, and the industry expertise required to apply this very technical solution to industry-specific operational processes. And there's a great quote in a recent Forrester report that says that 93% of organizations say that they are not fully prepared to handle the issues arising out of commencing an automation journey. And that's where HPA comes in. So we are the leading RPA-as-a-Service provider for companies that seek secure, reliable, intelligent automation solutions. We have thousands of bots deployed that we run and manage for our clients. And we utilize our proprietary technology, methodologies, and immense library of reusable automation components to deliver scalable, endlessly scalable RPA that accelerates, solidifies, and locks in ROI from the very beginning of the engagement. We have over 850 workflows that we have developed. That's what we call an automated process of workflow. We have over 2,000 robots working daily. We have over 100 signed clients across 8 industries and hundreds of applications which we have automated, all of which we can reuse for the next client that has that particular application which needs to be automated. So with this approach to automation, you get higher quality and compliance. You have instant scalability because we're not selling robots. We sell outcomes. So when one of our robots is able to perform a unit of work from start to finish in lieu of one of your staff doing it, we get paid a success fee. So the unit economics of what does it cost to do with a robot versus what does it cost to do with people, we can establish on the front end by giving you clear, transparent pricing for a given automated process. And that's how one of the many ways that we help lock in that ROI early. Additionally, because we're not selling robots, we're selling outcomes, we can make as big of a workforce as is required to get the job done available to you to complete that work. So if there's seasonality or cyclicality or a one-time backlog of work that pops up due to a regulatory change or any other change, or a hurricane or anything like that, we can scale up that workforce seamlessly to meet that demand. And we have a lot built in that you'll see throughout the day today that assures the quality of the robotic outputs that transcends anything that you can ever achieve with existing staff and likely with any of your own RPA programs or centers of excellence. So what does that mean? A lot of people say, well, how does robots as a service compare to a typical licensed RPA approach? Well, when you're thinking about an RPA program, if you're going to go and buy software and staff people to build it out, we've already talked about the challenges facing organizations trying to do that. But the cost considerations are numerous and not usually apparent up front. RPA vendor licensing, the RPA vendor training, infrastructure setup, third-party integrations, costs of investing in a proof of concept, the cost of establishing a COE to hire and relocate analysts and programmers to plan, design, build, deploy the program, securing IT support within your own organization to get infrastructure set up and deployed. And then there are significant ongoing costs, license renewals, maintenance renewals. The maintenance considerations are anywhere between 25 to 40% of a typical automated process of your upfront costs you're going to incur each year to keep that up and operational. Why? Because the processes are constantly changing and constantly breaking, so you are constantly reprogramming and retraining those robots.
So it's expected for those changes to happen and modifications to be necessary, but it's not predictable. So you can't plan ahead, and it's very disruptive to a planned backlog or a planned working schedule when something comes in for a mission critical process that needs to be responded to and resolved immediately. It has tremendous downstream impact.
Yeah, well put. then you get into things like third-party integration, licensing fees, infrastructure maintenance fees, the vendor management considerations, any managing SLAs, and annual overhead for the support personnel, ongoing training of that support personnel, continuous process optimization costs, and continuous expansion of that automation program. I've personally sat in so many COEs. We have sat in so many COEs, and we've seen this big backlog of automation ideas built up. And often it will start where the IT department will sponsor and pay for these initiatives. And then when that when the costs are shared and fully burdened on operations after a 12-month, 18-month, or 24-month period, suddenly no one's interested in implementing that automation anymore because the costs are well understood by the organization, and the operations groups aren't prepared to fully burden those costs because they're not as attractive as they thought that they were when you weren't taking into account the significant maintenance considerations and other costs and COE overhead. Compare that with robots as a service. We do require infrastructure, and that infrastructure can be on a virtual private cloud like Amazon, or anywhere where there are target applications that we can automate against. It's an incredibly flexible deployment model, and we can deploy on very low-cost solutions and very lightweight virtual machines. The infrastructure maintenance considerations are really the cost of adding VMs for new robots. So, last time I checked, it was $60 for the VMs that we typically run on Amazon. Not a very expensive investment. So you want an additional worker, pay an additional $60 a month and you have one, which is pretty awesome. And then from a support perspective, we sell outcomes. First and foremost, we sell outcomes. There's a minimal implementation fee that reflects the value of the reusable components that we've already developed. We pass that savings on to clients. But beyond that, when clients need a change and they need support to get their robotic force updated, they pick up the phone and call their business analyst at HPA, and we handle it for them. And we'll explain how we do that now. It's a much simpler model, a much more predictable cost model, and even though it follows a different procurement paradigm than most clients are accustomed to, it's much more transparent, much more predictable.
So in the recent climate with the pandemic, having an RPA licensed product serves to solve some of the challenges of manual processes, but it also complicates your pandemic plans, complicates your business continuity plans, contrasted with RPA-as-a-Service, where you're still getting the same benefit with some of the cost savings that Avery's taken us through, as well as it doesn't complicate your business continuity planning, but rather simplifies it considerably.
Amen. So we've been beneficial to receive recognition from Forrester, from IDC, from HFS Research for the automation work that we do. But let's get into it. Let's get into the nitty-gritty and talk about what you're going to see on the floor today. John, do you want to kind of walk through our typical implementation process and kind of set the stage for what folks will see on the floor?
Sure. And, I think first and foremost, as we think about an RPA service, what HPA brings to your business is over 10 years of identification and refinement of processes. So what you'll see today as we go through this tour and you experience our process is constant refinement. So, when we talk about delivery excellence, there's no finish line to delivery excellence. So as we refine a process, we continue that program throughout. So what the way this works, right? And this is, like I had mentioned, throughout 10 years of constantly reevaluating, is we sit down with our clients and we go through an evaluation process. What we find is, especially folks that are new to RPA, they'll try to automate really anything. But what we have found through hundreds of successful projects is there are some processes that shouldn't be automated. So we do an evaluation process based on lessons learned and automation, automatability of that particular system. So that happens first. Then we go through a proprietary documentation process, and we'll show you that as well. And that documentation process really goes step by step on what the users are doing. And the differentiator for HPA there is that not only do we document your process, but we also look at your process as well. And through looking at your process, understanding it, we do recommend as part of our documentation improvements to those processes. The next step in this, and it's really throughout the process, is we want your team highly engaged. So validating what we've learned through that process. So we create the document and then we send it to you for validation and approval. We want to make sure that what we have documented is exact. And, the documentation component, right? It's a very difficult process to go through because we have folks that have been doing on your side that have been doing the job for 20 years. They don't know the nuances to share with our experts and documentation experts. So our team is trained to ask questions for what you didn't share. So I consider it like a detective sitting through a documentation session, understanding what they're doing, but then also asking questions to complete the picture. We go through a validation process where that's approved.
And with that validation process, John, one of the things that might be helpful to note is we actually do the work. So our team is credentialed into a client environment, into your environment, and they will click through that workflow document exactly as it is written. And so not only are we asking a process owner to sign off on the document, but we're asking them to sign off that the work items which we manually processed generated the correct and expected business outcome. And if we get this part right, we dramatically accelerate the rest of our implementation, and it's one of the special skills that we've developed over the past decade. And we'll go into more detail about capture markup language and our documentation editor, which we call Capture, which is a really special ingredient for reducing miscommunication in requirements gathering by using plain English to describe all of the work that we do. It's really important, and we're excited to show you.
So, Gabriel, I want to hit on something you said there. You said that we're credentialed into your environment. And with a partner coming in and having access to your systems, naturally there would be some fears of security, some protections. But if we're credentialed into your environment, essentially the same security procedures that are in place already today for your employees and your staff and your process would apply to our bots as well. So there's no above and beyond security protocols necessary beyond what you're already doing and what you already have in place.
That's an interesting point, Aaron, too. One of the things that I had to learn coming into RPA was these are virtual workers, right? And I think if we walk away with one thing from this, is that we're training virtual workers. So we call it documentation, but it's training. And we use a human to replicate the training, but we are training virtual workers. So, the point that you bring up about the infrastructure and adding a bot is similar to if you were to add a consultant or a new employee, right? They need the same infrastructure. They'll run the same way. It's UI automation, and so they can see the bots run. So that's a really important point.
The onboarding time is instant rather than weeks with a new employer.
So once we have the validation completed, we have gone through the training. We have validated that the training that we received was accurate. We move into the development phase, what we call training the actual robot themselves, right? And that's where we do the development component of that. The development lasts anywhere between 14 days and then can be significantly larger than that based on the complexity of the workflow.
We'll talk more about complexity as we go through the site visit, but the rule of thumb and one of the things that we've learned over the last decade is essentially because, and John will finish going through this process, but there are so many rounds of validation and testing required to get this up and operational and successfully automating work that the longer the process takes to complete magnifies and amplifies the implementation timeline by magnitudes. So we're always working with clients to understand, look, we can do that 2-hour process. We can automate that 2-hour process, but your implementation timeline is going to be very long. And we bring the benefit of that experience to the conversation early to help them figure out where can we pull that low-hanging fruit and generate clear, demonstrable business value in the shortest time frame. And maybe there's a way to break that 2-hour process up into smaller processes, which we can automate to deliver value. These are really common gotchas for automation programs where people trip up and they say, "Oh, it only takes a half hour. We can automate that." Well, yep, you can, but you're going to have someone manually going through and doing that half-hour process 10 or 20 times, and then you're going to have the robot do it hundreds and hundreds of times. And you're going to have a lot of auditing to do if there's any variability in that process.
So we have the experience and the knowledge of those gotchas that we bring to the table in every situation. Absolutely. Where a licensed RPA product might have templates, might have bots that they start with, but the staff or the team that's hired internally wouldn't have that experience of those gotchas and would fall trap to things that, quite frankly, we've been trapped by before and overcome.
Absolutely.
And that's a good segue into the next phase of the implementation, which is testing. And as Avery had mentioned, with the length of implementation, the longer it is, automation is, could be characterized as fragile. We are largely dependent on the UI, but that's not the only challenge with automation. Testing is a big component. So when we test a low complexity workflow, we generally have a lot of test data. We understand the scenarios, and we can test positively and negatively the scenarios that are part of that. When we get into long-running workflows, highly complex workflows, getting test data to isolate individual scenarios is just as challenging and takes exponentially longer to get that test data to isolate that scenario. So what we find with long-running workflows is we deal with the maintenance component from the fragility of that particular process just as automation, but then also we're dealing with scenarios that weren't captured through testing. So testing is a critical component. And what we do is we do a lot. You'll hear us mention a lot about complexity of workflows. So as we go through this, based on complexity, we know how many rounds of testing that we'd like to do. And this is really a differentiator for our service, right? We watch as clients go through challenges of determining, do we do 1 round of testing? Do we do 30 rounds of testing? Because of our experience and our history, we can advise you and consult with you and say that based on the number of scenarios, based on what we're seeing with this particular workflow, we want to see this percentage of outcome and successful outcome with this process. And so that's part of the service that you get with the testing service that we do at HPA. When we see the level of success, that we know the bots are trained properly, we know that the outcomes are achieved successfully. And just to add to that, we're not looking for 100% success of automation. We're looking for the bots to process correctly. So the outcome that we expected them to see is actually being achieved. So I think going into this, a lot of times clients expect that we can automate 100% of the edge cases. And through this process, what we try to educate clients on and what we find is those edge cases, that's okay. The cost to automate those edge cases is far greater than the cost it is to just do that manually. So So there is a fair amount of work that we do that we put into a manual review state that we pass back to clients, and they pick up that work and do the more complex work. And that's all identified up front when we're going through training, and then also in that testing component.
Classic diminishing returns problem. And this is another classic gotcha of RPA programs trying to capture every scenario. Again, there's almost an intuitive feel about identifying those pathways that can get you to that Pareto 80-20 and generate the most value. And that's where we're always focused for our clients. And part of being a service offering and having the commercial construct the way that we have it affords us, I think, a little bit more latitude in how we discuss that with clients to act as a true trusted advisor versus someone who's charging for time and materials, in which case, running over that curve of diminishing returns is to the vendor's best interest. That's not the case with HPA.
So moving on to the next phase, which is deployment. We use a lot of engineering terms here. We're an IT company. We're a technology company. And so we use a lot of technology terms, but really this is deployment of the workforce themselves. Although we use those technology type terms, it's easier for our clients a lot of times in operation to really think of this as a workforce deployment. So we go through that deployment process, and during that deployment process, what we do is, and you'll see this throughout our implementation process, is we have gates, and for the deployment process, we have what's called a ramp. So we train the robots, we validate the robots, we go through the development process, we test it, but then we don't release it fully on the population. What we do is we ask for a subset of data for the process, and we run that against the subset. Again, testing, making sure that the bots are doing what they're supposed to. We go through another phase of validation, and then once that deployment and what we call ramp is completed, then we release the bots into full production. The next stage is scale, and that's one unique component of the HPA solution, and that's scalability. Our robots will scale horizontally based on the infrastructure that you have. Our on-prem implementations are generally limited by the amount of infrastructure that's in place, but our cloud implementations are limitless. So we can add infinite bots to that deployment and process massive workloads in a matter of minutes versus what could take days and weeks.
Super important point that I'll restate something John said, because we haven't addressed it up to this point. We deploy on-prem and in the cloud. A large number of our clients are in highly regulated, very information-sensitive environments, and they prefer on-prem deployments. We still remotely manage and administer those deployments for our clients by having a secure connection into that environment that meets all of their information security requirements in a way that's more secure than having more assets out there with humans connecting to them.
Okay, so operating the robots and maintaining the robots, we have a world-class implementation group, and that's what we've talked to up to this point. But equally as good, if not better, is how we operate and maintain the robots. We shift our workloads to these robots. So when they don't run, it is a massive disruption to operations. So predicting as best as possible and reacting to changes to the UI is absolutely critical. So as you'll see throughout our tour, our delivery is built around ensuring that these robots are operational, are performing as expected, and we can adapt quickly to the changes that come up. Our expertise comes a lot from automating individual systems and then replicating that automation of that particular system. And so when we see an issue with one particular client on a system, we'll know that that's going to impact across the board. And we have systems in place that will allow us to see where that's implemented and fix it in one spot. And really what we find is it takes, and it took us several years to figure this out, a lot of heartache, a lot of lessons learned, a lot of disruption to organizations, and really that's the power of the service that HPA provides. When we look at our uptime of our robots and our production time of our robots, it's far superior to those that are running internal centers of excellence.
So let's hammer on that a little bit deeper and make sure that the context is clear for you all. The model today for RPA COEs is a many-to-many. So a vendor comes in and they're automating SAP for one client, and everything that they do for that SAP program within that client is constrained to that client environment. So they're selling any maintenance or any changes to their SAP automation to that client. And then if they have another client doing exactly the same thing, they're selling it to that client completely in isolation with no reusability. It's a classic kind of T&M services approach that misses the tremendous promise of reusability and not reinventing the wheel to deliver something that is not, nor should it ever be, a core competence for the types of organizations that we work with, organizations like yours. You're in the business of processing healthcare claims or originating mortgages or processing property and casualty claims. You're not in the business of building robots and reinventing the wheel every time something changes in a target application. We've already reinvented the wheel, and we can deploy it seamlessly to all of our clients, which is a huge benefit for reducing the total cost of ownership.
So when we talk to clients and consult with clients and advise them on their RPA journey, governance comes up a lot. And governance, from a maturity standpoint, generally happens further down the path for companies. So we see them, try to automate a workflow. They have maybe a level of success. They try to do more, and what happens is they get a year or two down the road and realize that there was no consistency in their automation, and they're in a position where there's cleanup that needs to take place. And one of the key benefits, and we get really excited when we talk to clients at the beginning of that journey, so that we can get them started on a path that we've created and matured over the past 10 years. And that is, a big part of that, from the service directly, the governance is built in from a technology standpoint. And that's one thing that our clients can be really confident in going in, is that we do have that governance built in from the beginning. But where we really add value to our clients is that governance on the actual operation side. What do you automate? How do you go through the process? We see a lot of our clients have pockets of success. And so one particular group is automating a lot, and they're reducing cost, their quality is improving, while very similar in groups that are automatable, they're not doing anything with automation. And that's part of our experts that engage with our clients, going out and helping them set that up. And they do two things. One is help with the intake, but also help with the educational component of reaching out to those groups and helping them understand the success. And with our breadth of what we've automated, we have not only the capability to execute your automation, but also to speak specifically to the challenges that you have within that particular, whether your group.
And so on the subject of technology, there's five key pieces of technology that we'll be talking about today. and others kind of smattered throughout the visit. The first is Capture, and Capture is our documentation editor powered by our proprietary markup language called Capture Markup Language. And that's a plain English account of how to perform work. It's something that I can hand to you. You can pick up, having never seen a low-level operational process. You can sit at a machine and know how to do that process because it's so crisply and simply described, and we've stripped it down to the barest minimum viable requirements, so that you don't have out-of-date screenshots. You don't have something written by a non-native speaker that has an interpretation variance. We've solved a lot of these problems over the last 10 years and understood that as staff changes, as process owners change, and you might still have some manual fallout from the process because we're not over that curve of diminishing returns, you need to be able to pick it up and know how to do the work. And it's a huge benefit that we provide to our clients that we have stable, reliable, consistent documentation for all of the processes that we automate, and that can't be understated. It's a huge problem for some very large organizations that we work with.
And it serves as an authoritative document for us when we, in the future, maintain that same robot. We reference that authoritative document and update that authoritative document as we're modifying and maintaining the robot over time.
That's right. And I think it's really important that folks understand it is not a point in time. That is a document that matches what the production code is doing 100%. And we take that so seriously. We actually deploy the capture document with the code. So when you look in production, you will find that documentation and see the exact instructions for the robot.
So much so that we, effectively, it is an extension of our contract. We get paid for successfully defined outcomes. Success is defined by that workflow document. The workflow document is ever changing. So if we ever want to go back, and being a fully managed service puts a tremendous onus on us to be able to defend and certify that the work we've done is the work that you've told us to do. And that discipline that requirement has created an immense amount of discipline for us in terms of gathering and updating those requirements, and also doing things like tracking who requested this change, when did they sign off on it, how many rounds of validation did we do on that change, how many rounds of testing did we do on that change. All of that is captured in our governance platform, which we call Hub. And Hub is awesome, and you'll see it at every station that we go to today. It is a core framework that manages projects, implementations, ticketing, production. Hit me. What else we got? Billing, CRM,
Client objectives, measurements against those objectives.
We've got pipelines, all the testing data. How many rounds of validation, how many rounds of robot testing, when did that happen, what was the success rate of those rounds of testing, what else?
You know, it really is from inception, the initial engagement with clients all the way through the success of the workflow. We can tell you what happened at every step of the way through the entire life cycle of that workflow, client, whatever it might be.
And then those are kind of those power our methods, right? And how we do what we do, Capture and Hub. The other pieces of technology that you'll see are the app repo or application repository, which is that reusable base of automation components. And we approach this differently. There's no concept of reusable bots, practically speaking. But there is a lot of value in reusable automation concepts. So if you want to know how to perform a search in SAP, and you're writing an automation script as an implementation developer at HPA, all you have to do is write sap.search and then send whatever search parameter you want to be searched within SAP. And the application repository is going to say, I see that you're referencing SAP. It's going to determine and validate what version of SAP you're using. If there's any client-specific flavor that's put around that version of SAP and that version of querying a process so that we can achieve true reusability even in the face of client customizations. And it does all of that for the developer, right? So that utility of reusability is also very important because they're not going in there and tweaking and rewriting core code. The code's already there, and the code is already but packaged in such a way that they can invoke the concept and implement that automated process very quickly.
And the next time SAP changes their search function, we change it once instead of changing it dozens of times.
Yeah, so we do get two benefits out of this approach, which is speed to development. Right? It's SAP.search, not the thousands of lines that went into writing SAP.search, and then there's the update component. So we look at both from an implementation standpoint and efficiency gain, but also, and as we say, from a maintenance standpoint, we are better than anybody in the industry in terms of maintaining and running robots. That's a great example of where we are and why we are.
And then, of course, we'll go through the global manager and the robots. The global manager is a really important concept to understand. It's our orchestration layer. It's the boss robot. It tells all of the individual robots what to do, when to do it, what priority. It sets all the priority. It manages all the work items because, again, it's a service and we're selling outcomes. So because of that, clients can dictate what work they need done by when. Maybe they need all of this work to be processed before 8 a.m. Eastern time, before staff comes in to do some downstream processes. Well, the global manager can get all of the workforce working on that one process until it's complete according to those requirements, and then shift the robots around throughout the day because any of the robots can do any of the automated processes that we have deployed for that client. And the global manager is really that first line manager. And then on top of the global manager, that boss robot talks to production support here in Nashville. And our production support team works with that manager robot to handle any exceptions or things that are unexpected that the boss robot doesn't know how to handle. And that's kind of an interactive governance layer that enables us to say, hey, if there's a third-party website that didn't give you notification of a refresh or an update to their user interface, and it wasn't part of your governance process and it does change, well, our robots are going to detect that. They're not going to continue. They're going to put their hand up and say, boss, I don't know what to do. Boss robot will talk to production support. Production support will work with the client to resolve how to handle that issue, either directly or through the business analyst. And we'll revise those requirements for that new interface and get those robots back into production as quickly as possible because our incentives are aligned because we only get paid for successful outcomes. And the definition of success has changed. And we're telling you that it needs to change. You're telling us how to change it. We have to get it back into production to continue generating that outcome-based revenue, which is very important to us. And that alignment of incentives fundamentally in this service model can't be understated. It is paramount to our speed, efficacy, and achieving the greatest degree of reusability possible because that is in our best interest with this commercial model. So guys, anything to add before we break?
Yeah, no, I just want to cover with the global manager. Not only is the global manager issuing massive commands for large workflows and workloads, but the global manager is also keeping track of everything. So compliance, historical information, and performance metrics as well. So how are the robots performing? Are they improving? Is there any degradation? And that's another part of the maintenance component too, where we start getting alerting that something's taking longer. So a lot of times when we talk about clients reaching out for support, we generally know. We know way before they know that there's challenges with the systems.
So we've talked a lot about individual robots and robots having successful outcomes. It's true that a robot has a goal in mind, and that goal is oftentimes defined or can be easily defined, where when we partner with a client, we don't necessarily look at individual goals for robots, but rather we look at what are the objectives for automation for this organization. And we try to align the combination of those successful outcomes to their overall objectives. In one case, for example, they might be a catastrophe injury. And the objective in that situation might not be cost savings, but rather avoiding the situation where a hurricane is going to hit and they have to prepare their staff to be there on the weekend to handle the claims. Having a robot that might save cost, might have scalability, might solve certain problems, all boils up to the main objective is they don't want to have those tough conversations with their staff. We align the combination of those robots the best we can with their help to their main objectives.
And ultimately, it almost always, our true north is almost always our client's customer experience. And because we're on the hook for outcomes, we have to build the business case on the front end. The unit economics need to work out. We have to understand the business imperative for our clients, and we have to understand the relationship between the work that we do and how it improves their customer experience, because having been in business for 10 years, if the leadership within your organization changes, we need to be able to put our hand up and say, this is why we're doing this work and this is the benefits that accrue to you, because there's this addiction to reevaluating vendors and changing vendors. And that's something that we have to get in front of if we want to protect and defend, and most importantly, protect and defend our revenue, but our revenue corresponds to value that's generated for you. So for us to be a good, trusted advisor to our clients, we have to understand the continuum of how that work translates into cost reduction, improved customer experience, or any other virtuous benefits, and be able to articulate that consistently and on a recurring basis in every conversation we have. So now I think we'll probably make an abrupt cut, because we've been sitting here talking for a long time, and we'll actually have you guys walk with us through the office to different areas and hear from different team members about what they do and how they do it.
As markets leader, one of my responsibilities is maintaining relationships with our clients. And in Q1 of 2020, we had a net promoter score of 34, which is world-class and represents that our clients value us as a partner. One of the things we do to maintain the relationship with the client is we assign each of them a relationship manager. This relationship manager is responsible for quarterbacking both internally and externally, making sure that the right people are in touch with the right folks and that our objectives align. The relationship managers are the quarterback for the account, and we know that our success is tied directly to successful outcomes on the client side. So both HPA and the clients share incentives and share risk. We want these and we need these automated processes to be successful. So the client relationship manager is regularly working with the stakeholders on the client side, the internal stakeholders on the delivery side, and the production support teams to make sure that those incentives are aligned and we're together focusing on them. What you're looking at here is Hub's view into the potential workflows that clients have made us aware that they're interested in automating or that we're actively exploring automating. The client relationship managers will track them all the way from lead to the point where they're ready to hand over to the delivery team for implementation, all with the goal of finding places we can add this value and adding that automation into the client.
This is our daily launch area. Every day we get together as a team and we go through critical items. John, can you tell us more about that?
Sure. As we had discussed in the overview, out of prod and underperforming workflows are mission critical. it's largely impacting to client operations, and we know that we need to prioritize those to get back into production. This is Hub, and Hub, as we had discussed as well, is the central point of all operations that we run, from documentation through running the robots. And as part of that is a ticketing system. So every issue that we're having with client production is logged in the system. It receives criticality, and our team responds to that based on the criticality of the incident itself. So every morning we gather as an entire team. So it's our morning launch, our all hands. So every resource, every delivery resource that we have is part of this meeting, whether they're connected via phone or they're in this room. And what we do is, and today I have Nick McKean. He is the manager of production support.
Hey guys.
And for this meeting, what Nick does is he comes in here and he'll go through each critical issue, talk with the team on that issue, and then look to get resolution. And the morning launch consists of this particular meeting, and then we go into a scrum where the teams break off into their own stand-up, and then we finish with what we call the scrum of scrums, where we bring the leadership together and we take a look at what is being worked on today. So what Nick is doing here is he is setting up the day. He is letting the teams know what the critical issues are for that day that need to be resolved. The teams then take that information, they move into their stand-ups, and then they work that into their implementation.
All right, well, just kind of going to dive right in today, guys. So I think we had a couple issues with Holloway Health. Chaz, I think there's something going on with the EOB pricer.
Yes, there's a new pop-up for the EOB line right after we input the new data and go to accept. And we have a new pop-up that we have to account for. This has caused an increased number of skips, and we just noticed this right before the meeting.
What's the full impact? Are we fully out of prod?
We are looking at about 100, 150 so far. We still have about 4 hours of processing time.
Okay.
I would say daily impact of like 600.
Is that team aware? Do we have test data?
We do not since first notice.
Understood. All right. Can we make sure that we bring that up in the stand-up today? Just reach out.
Absolutely.
And Chaz, can you let the client know?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
So with this particular launch, we'll go through every single workflow, anything that's having issues, we'll discuss it, we'll make sure we have coverage on it that day. And then this meeting typically lasts between 15 and 20 minutes, and then we dismiss as a team, and they'll move to their scrum, and then they'll prepare their day.
So we're obviously at reduced capacity because we're in the middle of a global pandemic. So the team is still doing this virtually every day. All delivery resources are coming together to go through this process. It's absolutely critical for continuity of service delivery. And again, we get paid for outcomes. Successfully processed outcomes as defined by a client. If something's holding up those outcomes, UI change, in the example of Holloway Health, or anything else, it's our responsibility to work quickly and efficiently with clients to get that process performing again and generating those outcomes. John, text.
Sure, and as you can see, our ticketing system has internally built SLAs, so we know the resolution times that we're looking for these particular tickets. In addition to what you're seeing here with Hub, given the criticality, there are other procedures that take place. So if we do have an urgent ticket, there's communications that are set up, conference bridges are opened, and we have dedicated support from engineers to resolve and restore the service to that workflow. The notes, I had mentioned before, but really the entire life cycle, and this is really the power of Hub, but the entire life cycle of a workflow from the infancy, from the approval from the client through the final time it's run is all recorded. We can give you the entire timeline of the performance, what impacted the performance, down to the documentation, what specific construction is running. So it's from an overall vantage point of the life cycle of the workflow, we have great visibility into that. And then, so when we look at, just how the system actually functions, we have our on hold, and this is a standard agile process, but we have on hold. These are things that can't move forward. So really where Nick is focusing on is, it's really one of 2 points. One is what's to do today, and then what's in process today. So when he identifies an issue, he'll move it into today, and then the team will be able to pick that up in their stand-up, obviously complete. We have a suite of metrics that are run off the ticketing system, so we can see across all 100 clients that we have the performance of the client, the resolution times for our clients, and that also helps with reallocating resources to specific instances. So as Nick had shared, when we're having these discussions in the morning meeting, we want to know the impact of the operation. If they're coming in at 9 and they're going to come into robots not processing healthcare claims as an example, we want to know about that. We want to get as many resources on that as possible, get it resolved, restore service, and continue processing. And so all that context is shared as we do our updates.
And so we mentioned that Hub is a kind of a universal system. It's the backbone of our business. What you may not have seen, we won't go through all the details, but it's important. We can track the time against tickets. We can track and assign those tickets to individuals and subsequent tasks. We can launch the workflow document directly from that ticket view. Everything's integrated. So Capture, the documentation editor, and Hub, they talk to each other. Anytime a document is updated in Capture, it syncs with Hub seamlessly. So we always have the most up-to-date requirements accessible at a click from multiple different views, from multiple different users. It's a really cool, cohesive thing that decreases the risk of miscommunication.
So when we're confident that the teams have identified all the issues and they've been logged in a ticket and they've been set to do, they can go on and then they can set their day. So now we're on to our final stage in the morning launch. So we've gone through our critical issues. We've set the plan for each individual team. And now the client implementation manager will come in and they'll share the plan for the day with our leadership team. This gives our leadership team a chance to ask questions about dates, dig in on any technical issues or anything like that. And then when we walk out of here, we know collectively from the individual people that are working on our workflows all the way up through the leadership of the group, they're ready to go. So in this session, we have our development manager, we have our business analyst and client implementation manager, and then our client implementation managers in this session.
All right, so yesterday our team, we worked on LSIR workflow. We reviewed the outcomes and sent those to the clients. COC disclosures workflow, we continued dubbing out the blend updates. For today, we're going to continue on with disclosures, retesting, and sending those, as well as some third-party signer method updates. For sending appraisals, we'll be deploying code to one of the machines. And then initial CVs, we did have a client system update, which caused us to lose our access. The client has been notified, but we're currently working to get a fix for that. Will that impact the date? Yes, unfortunately, it will impact the date, but we're constantly working to get that more information on the update.
As far as that goes, I've reached out to their IT department, escalated there, and it should be resolved by the end of the day.
Okay, perfect.
All right, so as we wrap this up, we have a high degree, a high confidence that we've identified all the critical issues. The teams are ready to go. Management's aware of it, and the client has been communicated with. At this point, our day is set, and then we execute. And then we'll do it again tomorrow. Now that the morning meeting is complete, we've identified all of the critical issues that we're going to face today. We transition into our scrums. So all the teams break up, they come into this planning session, and they set their day. Again, we work backwards from the critical issues all the way to implementations. So with us, our client implementation managers, they understand both the issues that we're having and keeping workflows in prod and resolution on the underperforming workflows, as well as the portfolio of implementations that we're doing. So what we do is we do a 10 to 15 minute stand-up, critical issues are addressed, and then we transition to the implementation. Again, the implementation manager understands what that entire portfolio looks like, and they're looking to make sure that the progress is being made on the individual workflows.
All right, so this morning we had a ticket for Holloway Health. We were receiving some new pop-ups after accepting some EOB lines. We made a ticket for this, and now we're going to be assigning it to a developer, Zoe, right here. Is that something that you can work on today? Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we will assign this ticket to Zoe. And then in regards to your task for the day, go ahead and move this over. And then, all right, so what else do you have on your plate for the day?
Third-party signers method and the query update for XMRs can also be moved over. I can get those both done by the end of the day.
Okay, awesome.
What happens here is like Alyssa had shared, she goes through each one of the developers, they set their plan for the day, she'll go through the BAs, they'll set their plan for the day, and when this meeting wraps up, we'll know confidently that everybody has a full plate of work to do for that day, that it's the right work, we're making the right progress that we need to, critical issues are covered, and it's also an indicator, and we'll see in the next session, what needs to be communicated. There are times when something like a critical issue will come up, and that'll push additional work to a further day that won't be able to get to, that we needed to get to, and that's an opportunity for us to talk about it, how the delay, the impact of the delay, and then what the communication is to the client. Now that we've had a chance to look at the morning launch, we're going to take a closer look at the individual teams and roles and responsibilities. So we're here with Kyle. Kyle's going to walk us through the business analyst role, what he does for documentation, how that's recorded, and how that's shared with the client.
A business analyst's daily tasks involve a lot of communication, primarily. So we're the primary contact for any client. So our job is to respond to them, but also to make sure that we understand the requirements of any process that's going to be automated. So to do that, we'll generally sit down on a call or in person, walk through a detailed process step by step, and then translate that into a set of rules. And we document all of this in a program we use called Capture. So here's an example of a workflow that I've documented in Capture. This is a very long process for authorizations for hospitals. So as you can see, we break each step into rule-based logic with a lot of verification steps. We can translate literal text in green, and it's kind of color-coded to help anyone understand what's going on.
So you can think of this kind of like a great resume. Every bullet starts with an action verb. It's the same thing for our detailed workflow document. Every line starts with the action that needs to be performed, whether that's storing information, clicking a button, navigating, verifying information. We always lead with the action. And all of the different colors that you see on the document are coded based on whether it's referencing a field, plain text, a button, or anything else. And the idea here is to make this document something that any layperson can pick up, look at, and know how to do the work successfully. And that ease of communication and the discipline around capturing this using simple language makes it portable across geographies as well.
Yep. So we use this document as a living document to represent the workflow, so we can discuss the steps involved with the client, but we also use it as kind of a bridge between you as the client and the developer. So they can take this, translate it into the robot script, and create the automation. So each workflow automatically calculates basically the complexity of the workflow. So down here in the corner, this workflow is rated as difficult. And that helps both ourselves and the client get a sense of how complicated the process is and the timelines involved in implementing it. We also use a couple different features in Capture to make revisions of the document. So for example, in the history here, we have all of the past revisions that this document has received, what date it was made, and we can also use a compare feature to easily translate changes to the developer to keep track of any modifications and help us look backwards if we ever need to figure out when something changed.
So something that's really cool about this detailed workflow document, and Kyle, if you can scroll to one of the blue areas, what you're going to see throughout this tour, is a concept that we're introducing now called the breadcrumb trail. So it's really important that when we're documenting this work, we're capturing how would a processor, how would a staff member describe the work that they're doing. And we structure the detailed workflow document in the same manner that they would use to describe that work. So they're not going to capture every nuance of every step of how they would describe it verbally, but we want to be able to give their managers or the process owner a plain English account of what work was done and how it was done. And that simplified breadcrumb trail lives with every outcome that we generate. So you'll see this when we go into production support. As the outcomes are generated, a plain English summary account of the work performed is attached to each outcome. So you can quickly audit and understand what happened and what the robots did. The same way that if you were to ask a staff member, what did you do on that loan, that claim, that whatever, what did you do on that? You can read it and see it and move on. And so when we're structuring these documents, we're keeping that in mind. How do we describe it at a human level? It's great that we have a proprietary documentation editor, but the power comes in to what we can do with that. So we can export a Word document. Everyone has Word. Everyone. And a client SME or process owner can open the document that we export from Capture in Microsoft Word, and they can track changes in Word to give feedback, which we can then incorporate into the source material. It's a small thing, but being able to rely on commonly available tools for that knowledge exchange and that knowledge refinement is really, really important for how we do what we do. And we've found that to be the best approach over the last decade of automating. And, Kyle, can you talk a little bit about DWDB and how we validate?
Let's step back a little bit and start from the beginning. So the way a business analyst approaches a new process is we'll generally set up a meeting either in person on site or through a WebEx, shared screen meeting. And we'll walk through the process with the subject matter expert, whoever knows it best. Walk step by step, ask intelligent questions, and document the entire process in Capture. After we have a process documented, there are always going to be oversights, things we missed, things that need to be added. So in order to verify that, we'll do what's called DWDV, or Detailed Workflow Document Verification. So we'll step through a process just as the SME would using test data. So every time we step through the process, we'll identify anything that needs to change, and we'll generate a mock outcome report, which is basically the summary of the task status and what was completed. And we'll make sure and cover basically every scenario in the workflow to get a complete picture and make sure everything is tested. As we go along and complete these rounds of testing, we track everything in Hub in the testing matrix. So here you can see an example of a client where we'll test a work item, whatever that happens to be, what percent of the workflow is covered, and then once it's audited by the subject matter expert, we'll generate statistics around what passed and their accuracy percentages.
And the other cool thing about this is everyone lives in Hub all day. So all these detailed workflow documents, they live in Hub, they sync with Hub. So if there's ever a business analyst that makes an update to a DWD, it's automatically synchronized with Hub to make sure that everyone's working from the same playbook all the time for any workflow, whether it's in production support, development, business analysis, or some other function.
So as you can see from what Kyle and Avery have shared, we have a mature, tested documentation and validation process that ensures the requirements are captured and approved and ready for development. So with that, let's go take a look at development. At this point, we have the documentation completed, it's validated with the client, and we're ready to do development. So we're here with Chaz, and Chaz is going to walk us through an architectural overview, and then he's going to walk us through what the development process is like.
Starting off, as far as the architecture of our automation, we have 3 layers of our code, and with the 3 layers, at the foundation of it is our core automation. The core automation layer handles a lot of what our automation does with the different applications, whether that be a console application, a Windows application, or a web application. The code at that level is very, very low level and very specific to the actions that we're trying to perform, such as click. Click would be a method that we would use obviously a lot, and we would use it in various applications. The next level of that is our application repository. The application repository is the code that is built out specifically for the various applications that we are automating. This is all of our client applications, and as I mentioned before, it can be anything from web, Windows, or terminal, and the various applications will use the core automation code to build out what we need to do for that application. So, when you open up an application, you start it and you log in, and from logging in, you navigate to this page, and from this page, you navigate to here, and you enter this data, and you grab this data, all those things, that's built out in our application repository. The third and highest level is our script or our process level. In that level is our code and our automation instructions. So, as you previously saw, we have our detailed workflow documents that are created, and those documents will outline what all we're trying to do for a particular process. That process is then handed off to a developer once it's ready to go, and a developer will then go through it, and they have to build out the code to match those automation instructions. With the automation instructions on the script level, that's where we are calling all the methods that we've created in our application repository for the application we're automating. So, when we go in there and we're checking for warning messages, and then we're checking for statuses, and we're entering this data, all that stuff, that is very particular to that process, that is what we're doing on the script level. So in terms of the development process, we will dive straight into, outlining, our script, which is a normal day-to-day thing that we do. From there, we will define what our preload or our load logic looks like, meaning are we going to load it from an Excel document? Is the client going to send us an Excel document with what we're trying to automate? Or are they going to, prefer us to query a database that they've given us access to, things like that. Basically, how are we going to get the work that we're going to perform? From there, we will dive right into the process logic, which is essentially the code translation of that detailed workflow document we've created, and basically code it out from start to finish. Start to finish, we'll code all that. After that, we'll essentially dive into our testing phase, what we call end-to-end testing. or development testing. We're not really in a test environment. We're not messing with production code or anything. It's more just unit testing, testing out different portions of our logic to make sure that there's no holes, no issues. And essentially, once we can make it all the way through the end, then we know that we're ready to move on to our user acceptance testing, our UAT process, our UAT stage. With the UAT stage, that's where we'll work with the client. They'll send us our process. They'll send us the logic that they want us to. UAT phase, where the client will send us the items that they want us to process in the testing cycle, and in the testing cycle we will go ahead and load those work items in their test environment, and we'll run our script through that process from start to finish and allow it to run for however many items they send. Once the job is finished running, we'll have a set of outcomes, and those outcomes we can then compile and send out to the client so that they can audit those. Once they audit, they can give us their feedback. Their feedback being whether these items all processed successfully, or maybe there was a couple items that had issues, and then the developer can then dive in and try and figure out what the issue is and get it resolved. Sometimes it's process related and we need to go back and update the workflow. And then other times it might be script related, and we need to go and fix some bug in the script where we couldn't account for it during end-to-end testing. So we'll go through that process of UAT several times until the client and we are satisfied with the outcomes that we're getting. And then following that, we'll move into our production ramp up, which is essentially the same phase as our UAT cycle, except for now we are doing it in a production environment. In the production environment, we'll still have the client send us the items they want us to process. We'll run a small batch of testing with those in a production environment and send those out to the client again to get them audited, make sure that everything looks good, and then once again we are satisfied and the client is satisfied, that's when we'll finally move that process into production and run full volume. One thing that's important to note is in our development, while we are creating the process, creating the script, we will essentially be adding breadcrumbs, which was mentioned previously. The breadcrumbs will be something that is client or user facing, where at the end when they're auditing they can essentially look through a step-by-step of what the process did. We open the claim, we click to this button, we check the status, etc. And in those breadcrumbs it really easily makes it clear on what the process did and what it didn't do or why it did certain things, which is not only useful for the developer to identify, which path the process is taking, but also for the client to know what exactly we did and didn't do. So on a much lower level, we have our logs. Our logs are all encrypted and they are all stored on our client environments, and they're all upheld with different clients' expectations or rules behind log retention. The logs are all encrypted, as I mentioned, and the logs will be very detailed and defined on a much lower level than the breadcrumbs. So at that level, it's really reporting out from our core automation, from our application repository level, and from our process level on every single detail about what we're doing to the process, what we're not doing, what we're finding, everything. And that way we can definitely do a thorough development audit on anything that could go wrong or did go wrong, as well as just to show what we did,
Yeah, Chaz, and that's an important point too. Those logs, the retention of those logs, if you had to go back and ask a human 5 years ago what they did on a particular claim, there'd be no way to put together that history. But from the logs that we create, obviously we follow the retention policies of our clients, but we can literally go back to a button click 7 years ago and tell you exactly what happened on that claim.
That's precisely right, and then that's definitely why we try to make the logs as robust as possible, and then the breadcrumbs are a simplified version of those logs to be more user-friendly, to where anyone can read them and know overall what happened to that process.
At this point, we've done the documentation, we've validated it, development is done, we've ramped the process. Now let's go take a look at production support. Workflow has been developed, it has been ramped, and now it transitions to production support. So in this room, with 5 associates, we run the daily equivalent of 7,000 FTEs. Chaz is going to walk us through the production support process, talk about the robots, how he runs them, the interactions he has with them throughout the day. Chaz?
Hello, guys. I run production support for several of our clients. I run about 20 clients currently right now, and that equivalents to about 500 robots or more, I would say. The main thing, our main job is to have quality control. So we're supposed to keep track and make sure everything is maintained, connected, and processing on a daily basis, even if it's a holiday. So if you see up here, you can see that we have a certain way of connecting to our machines. We have all our robots here. And if you look through here, you'll see several different, one of our programs running. We connect to their environment or we host our own. On here, you'll see there's about 30 machines right now processing anything that we needed to automate. And then we have our main control center. We call it the Global Manager. In the Global Manager, we use this to control and maintain all of the robots and run all of the processes. So what I'm basically going to do here is I'm going to go through each and every single section of this manager, our software, call it Automason, and make sure that I explain it in detail. So as you can see here, you'll see several different names on the left side. And just to give you a better understanding, this is just a normal machine where we have installed our software on here. There's nothing super special here other than that. But when you open up our software, you can see that we have several different workflows here. That's what we call it. We call it scripts. With scripts tab, we have a status saying whether they're running or have completed. And then we have how many machines are running on it. We call those robots. And then how many are in progress. And then how much items or data is being done per item. So if you go in here and you wanted to look at any of these in an in-depth area. So let's see, for example, you see edit 216 right here. This is a workflow from the client. We have 281 processed, or 281 in total, and we've processed 216. So if I wanted to view what this is, we call these items. It will take us to the Workflows tab. In here, we can gain a full in-depth look of every single process that is happening here. We can filter through them. It gives us great and large amounts of details. So if I wanted to see something that is completed, that has been successful or skipped, I can just go in here, select skip or success, right click it, click breadcrumbs, and I'm able to we're just probably going to have to cut that part.
Well, yeah, well.
So you just right click it, and then I'm able to check every single step that the bot had taken for each one of the processes. Now, this information is just not here. If you were to go one of the bots and were to watch it process, as you can see, there's a lot of code going through here. This is not easy to read. No client would be able to understand this data, but we do have a tab called breadcrumbs, and this explains it in pure English for us. The developers set up each and every single step the process goes through and prints it out. And when we export all of this data and send it to our clients, we make sure that we include this data in there so they will be able to understand what has happened exactly with the process. We store logs. Anything that happens to whatever we're automating will be stored here, and we would be able to audit it for any purposes or anything like that in the past.
So one of the great things about this software is the fact that it will indicate and let me know if there is any errors in the report. So let's say the page took too long to load, or the environment is really slow, or something crashed and stayed open and we have to account for a new pop-up, anything like that, we'll know immediately because we have this column called error items. And we can immediately investigate it by going into the work items, just like we were looking at the breadcrumbs earlier. If you were to pull it up, yeah, please do. You'll able to view the breadcrumbs and filter out for any errors that we might need to look at, and we'll know exactly at which step this were to failed, which helps us to immediately resolve any sort of these issues and get them back into running production. We also have a tab here called the Robots tab. This is how I control all the machines without actually having to look at the machines. Over here, you saw that I had a ton of machines to look over. This is a large task, especially when you're running about 500 or more machines. So in order to alleviate that, we have a section called the Robots tab. And in this tab, I can control a lot of aspects of these machines. I can restart them. I can kill any processes that may be held up, like Internet Explorer. I can assign whichever workflow we want to specific machines. So let's say we only have certain machines that can run this workflow. I can easily assign it from here without having to go to them manually through that process. On top of that, let's say the process finishes. As you can see here, it says completed, and I want to export it out and send it to the client. All I have to do is right click, export as Excel, any other file type we might need as well. I can encrypt the file and export it out. And once you do export it out, it will look sort of like this. So this is a generic report. We can add as many columns as we want. However much data that you possibly would need can be on this report as well. And we label them by success, manner reviews, skipped. So anything that needs to be looked at by the client or that we need to put a fix in will be on this report, and we'll give you a complete breakdown of every single step all the items had gone through, the completion date, and any other pieces of data that you might need. On top of this, we also like to keep track of our clients. So we have this view here. So every bit of information, how much data we are loading in, we like to keep it all in Hub. This is our software we use to keep track of everything. This includes volume and revenue. So if we need to say we have 5 processes or 550 items or 5 items running today, it will be put in here and the entire team will know how much we are processing.
So one of the things that we're really excited about is our new client portal. So we're taking the outcome reports and loads of other pieces of data that are relevant to our clients, and we're giving them an interface where they can sort through the data, they can garner business intelligence from it. While we already have many clients that have a direct database piped to us for loading that information, the portal is all about giving all clients standardized tools to understand what the robotic workforce is doing, what robots are running, so it can give them a greater sense of control over the service. Additionally, contracting and other commercial features are being centralized in this portal as well, so they can see cost trend data and any other information that is routinely asked for by our clients.
Well, this concludes our delivery overview for HPA. We appreciate your time with the video, and thank you for your interest in HPA.